Breakthrough experience on mushrooms, detailed. Psilocybin. Trip report. So I've been in a really tough spot in life for some time now, and I decided I needed some enlightenment in the form of 3.5 grams of dried shrooms in silent darkness. 9:56 I eat the 3.5 g straight and ate dinner right after. I went to take a shower and brush my teeth in preparation for the experience. 10:30 when I got into the shower, the thankfulness and excitement was coming over me, but no visuals. By the time I got out of the shower, light visuals started to happen. The carpets were flowing and slight color distortion. 11 o'clock. I'm gonna stop putting time marks now, because it's kinda hazy from here. I laid down in my bed and started enjoying the visuals and physical experience, when something that never occurred for me during a mushroom trip happened: auditory hallucinations. It sounded like a single string on a harp was pulled, and the tone it gave off never seemed to disappear, it just kept warping. At this point the visuals were getting pretty intense: faces, landscapes, human shadows, and all sorts of funny things were happening. I opened my eyes and it felt like I was standing by my door, but whenever I felt around with my hand I knew I was still in bed. As I lay there, ego starting to fade, I started wondering if these mushrooms were in fact magic and not deadly. I felt my soul being slowly lifted out of my body, and I started to have anxiety that I was truly dying, and how the next morning when my parents found me dead it would affect them so much. I kept checking my pulse and breathing started to feel like it was getting very hard. At this point I was seriously considering asking my parents to help me, lol. At the climax of my fear I was seeing 8 or so gun barrels starting me in the face, and I was just waiting for them to blast, and when they did I believed I was dead. After the fear of dying a beautiful calmness came over me, and it felt like I was being pulled out of this reality, and I was experiencing this very odd sensation, like as if I was getting massages and tortured at the same time. The layers of my mind started to peel away, and I started to understand that I am God, so are you, and so is everything that ever has been and ever will be, and that we are one consciousness that got bored for one reason or another and created this dimension and infinite others. And as I became part of this consciousness I realized that we did this to ourselves on purpose. We put handicaps on ourselves, so we can experience things for the first time and not be all-knowing. While all this was happening I was in this massive gigantic mandala cave that seemed endless yet limited. I'm guessing it gets bigger with a bigger dose. As I began to come down from my everything state I passed every state on the way down, the God state, then the universal state and so on, all the way down to the particles that create atoms, and when I say I came down in states I mean the handicap was coming back in layers. Very odd indeed. Overall this feels like I have started to gather the tools needed to experience this life properly, and stopped fearing death. Thank you for reading my trip report even though I don't know how to write a story very well. My second experience with shrooms, 5G, or that time I became God. Psilocybin. After having done shrooms once, 3.5G, LSA 5 times, 2 CB, and a whole lot of weed I thought I was ready for the 5-gram trip. I really wasn't. Keep in mind this happened around a month or two ago, so things might not be 100% accurate. Uneasy face. It was Monday. My GF came to my house at around 8 a.m. She had with her 8 grams of golden teachers. Although for months I was super excited to try out shrooms again, when I woke up that day I simply felt really tired. Probably cause I had only slept 3 to 4 hours the night before, LMAO. We took the shrooms at around 9. There was this one shroom which was super big. All by itself it weighed almost exactly 3.5 grams. We called it the mega shroom. I ate the mega shroom, as well as a few smaller, less mega shrooms, for a total of like 5 grams worth of shrooms. Turns out eating the mega shroom was a big mistake, cause that fucking thick boi completely annihilated me. Around 30 minutes and a few wax hits later, me and my GF were starting to trip. For me this was basically a flashback of my 2CB trip, which at that point was still super fresh in my mind, so I kept feeling chills running up and down my body in a not unpleasant way, as colors brightened and took on a warmer, orangish yellowish glow. My GF was just starting to see the walls breathing and flowing. We were both having a good time, but we also both felt a certain anxiety. Our first shroom trip had some really scary parts, and I think we subconsciously understood we were not mentally ready for that shit again. Just as we were getting into it, my GF got a phone call. It was one of her, at the time, closest friends. We'll call her Lucy. Lucy did not sound happy, in fact she sounded hysterical. Really hysterical. To this day I'm not really sure what happened, but basically my GF got her an Uber to my house. Hearing Lucy sobbing on the phone was putting me in a really bad vibe. The shrooms were starting to hit pretty hard, and I was like, I can't deal with this. So I told my GF to comfort Lucy, while I went to bed and tried to sleep. I felt horrified and sad and really fucking scared. I didn't even know what I was scared of, just that I was. I was also super tired. From this point forward things get super hazy. It's hard to remember what actually happened and what was just hallucination, even harder still to remember what order the events took place in. I remember being on the bed, having wonderful conversations with Lucy, who had at that point calmed down, and my GF. I remember feeling and understanding each other's thoughts and emotions on a much deeper and keener level than ever before. I also remember holding my GF and telling her again and again how scared I was. I remember crying. I remember being off the bed without ever having gotten up, sitting by the window some 5 feet from where I previously laid. I remember experiencing an eternity of pain, everyone's pain. The pain of the drug dealer when he looks in the mirror and realizes all the evil he has done, the pain of the druggie who knows he will never be free and is doomed to die cold and alone, in the throes of withdrawal or overdose. The pain of every child worker in every third world country, the pain of people I knew and people I didn't. And above all, pain itself, untied to any particular image or scenario, just raw, unadulterated suffering. I remember thinking at some point how before I had, in some twisted way, regretted how little I had to suffer in my life when compared to people not privileged enough to live in a first world country. I felt regret because I knew that suffering makes one durable and adaptable. I lamented living an easy life that bred in me a lethargic and mindlessly comfort-seeking spirit. This regret was almost funny to me now, as I felt that what I had been subconsciously asking for had been answered, and now that I felt true pain I knew it was something no one could ever want to feel. After wallowing in this misery for a time, I remember being somehow back on my bed, again with no memory of returning. By this point my other friend, who was there to trip-sit me and my GF, arrived. We'll call her Aura. Aura is super nice, sweet, and my best friend, but she's also not experienced with psychedelics, having only ever smoked weed. I was super happy to see her. Although my mind was still reeling and confused, it was really wonderful to have her there. We all talked for some time. It was amazing, but I soon started to realize that something was wrong. I kept saying weird shit cause by now I was starting to peak, and obviously the two people not on shrooms, Lucy and Aura, reacted accordingly. Their concern, however, only made things worse. I started becoming scared again and confused. A few moments later I realized I had no idea what was being said. In fact, I couldn't understand what any of the words meant. I completely lost my sense of language. Things get even more confusing here. I started saying really weird shit. I kept asking what day is it, to which my GF would reply with some version of it's Monday. We took shrooms. I couldn't comprehend any of it. I didn't know what Monday was, nor what it meant to take shrooms, nor even who I was. As I kept asking again and again, my GF would get ever more frustrated, and my friends ever more amused/confused. This only served to worsen things for me. Every time I heard the words "it's Monday," my brain created a scenario in which those words made sense to me. I thought I was an alcoholic or drug addict who had relapsed, that I was just leaving a drug-induced haze, and that it was Monday now, which for some reason filled me with an unbelievable dread. I thought I was a pedophile or a drug dealer, and that I had been caught, that not only were the police coming to put me in jail for all my life, but that I would also forever be known as the most horrible, disgusting and hateful person to all my friends and family. The trip flowed seamlessly between intense moments of hallucination, mostly when my eyes were closed, and brief moments of lucidity. At some point I said I'm an apple, and truly believed myself to be one. I could picture it in my head red, or perhaps green, on the outside, crunchy and white and delicious on the inside. I laughed. I didn't know what was so funny, but something about being an apple seemed somehow off to me. It was at some point here that the truly horrifying part of the trip began. I'm not exactly sure how it happened or what triggered it, but I suddenly became certain I was going to die. I remember listening to my friends and GF talk. At this point I relegated myself to listening. I was way too incoherent to participate. I started getting even more confused. They were saying words, but not the words I was hearing. They seemed to be taunting me, as if they understood everything and I knew nothing. Every time I tried to grasp what was going on I only further confused and scared myself. My best friend Aura in particular frightened me. I think she was sad about something cause I remember seeing tears in her eyes, but I might have hallucinated that. I did not know why she was crying, nevertheless it filled me with a deep sadness, as well as a great terror. She seemed deeply regretful about something. I remember she clicked her tongue in a what can you do sort of way. In my mind this tongue click was repeated several times throughout the trip, always filling me with the deepest sense of regret and utter hopelessness I have ever felt in my life. I kept looping, constantly asking what day is it and thinking the same thoughts. With every cycle however these thoughts became more frantic and intense. I don't really remember what they were, only that they scared me more than anything, and that deep down I understood that it was only going to get worse for all eternity. I was doomed to a never-ending cycle of exponentially increasing suffering. At some point Aura and Lucy left to buy some snacks, leaving me alone with my GF. It must have been around 3 hours into the trip. I remember thinking I was dying. Not that I was going to die, but that I was already in the process of dying. My mind frantically alternated between causes for my death. At first it was just random imagery. After a while I started to remember I took shrooms. My mind told me I took too much, and that I had broken reality itself, that everything I knew before was just a cosmic joke to make the real world, which was just an endless cycle of suffering in a small blue and red bedroom, even more painful in comparison. I realized I never should have taken shrooms, but I knew that it was inevitable. Everything that led up to this moment was, after all this was reality, and after every dream you eventually wake up. My GF later told me she was crying because she thought I'd never return to normal. But I didn't even notice. I was completely unresponsive. After probably 10 to 20 or so minutes, although it honestly could have been hours for all I could tell, Aura and Lucy returned with some snacks. They tried giving me something to drink, but it just spilled on my shirt. I remember seeing my friends and GF standing around me in a semicircle. Again the words I heard were not the words being said. Their expressions were grim, almost as if something horrible was happening to me, as if the most horrible thing was happening to me, as if I was dying. In my mind I was old now. I had woken up from my dream of being an 18-year-old who had taken shrooms in a bedroom with some friends. I was old and dying. I could hear the heart monitor, beeping ever slower. I remember seeing tears on the faces of my friends and family, tears so bitter they could only be the result of hopeless certainty that these were my last moments, that I was going to die right now. The people, whose faces were ever shifting, formed a tighter ring around my bed. To me it sounded like they were speaking in poetry, all at once, with a single harmonious voice. As they spoke I saw everything I have ever seen, felt everything I had ever felt, all at once. We don't think about everything very often. What that means to us. Everything isn't just the things you know about, or the memories you have, it is the totality of you. It is all the things you have ever been through, all the ways you have impacted the world, every feeling and idle fantasy you've had, every conscious and unconscious action you've ever taken. It is everything. In the moment before the poem ended I entered a timeless place. I knew the last line of the poem, sort of like how you can sometimes predict the next verse in a song. I knew what rhyme would complete this poem that was all of my life. Before my mind could finish the poem I felt at once a deep sense of some emotion that has no name, but is more profound than any other. The best way to describe it is a beautifully and utterly mournful surrender. It felt as though I could see the entirety of my life, without the limits of time. I could see and be in every moment at once. I heard the tongue click again, and this time understood why Aura was so indescribably sad. She knew, just like I did now, that it was over. That it was all over. It was so sad, it was so incomprehensibly sad. But it was an exquisite sadness, a deeply beautiful sadness. For although I knew it was over, I could experience all of everything in its entirety, without the bonds of temporal perspective. It was so wonderfully beautiful, all of it, more amazing than the most sublime song or story or movie or artwork ever made. And it was so deeply sad that I could only appreciate it, only hear its song, in the moment before it left me. Even writing this now, it's really hard not to cry about that. All this occurred in a single moment outside time. Then it ended. My mind completed the poem. And then you die. That was it. When my mind uttered those words, I died. After some time I realized that although I died, I had actually transcended death, and returned to the universal consciousness of Brahman or God, or nature, or whatever name you wish to give it. I was at complete peace. There was nothing to fear anymore, for I was everything. I distinctly remember thinking that after vibing with my friends and GF for a bit, I would summon my brother and another friend so that we could all hang out together. This made complete sense to me, for I intuitively understood that I could do anything, and that I was only limited to my human perceptions because in this moment I wanted to be. As I started to come down, I became ever more confused, although my sense of pure peace and equanimity didn't leave. I realized that I wasn't God and that I hadn't died. I had just eaten some mushrooms. This was such a bizarre and laughable explanation for what had just occurred that it took me several hours before it really sank in. After that, Lucy left, and me, Aura, and my GF all cuddled and watched animal videos. TLDR, took 5G of shrooms. Died, then became God, then went back to being human. Breaking through on mushrooms only on 3.5G? Psilocybin. This is really long, I'm sorry. So the title says it all. I have done mushrooms 4 times in the past, all with trips that were beautiful and eye-opening and just all around great. But this past Sunday I decided to dip back into psychedelics after a nice 6-month break. And instead of having the great trip I'm so used to, I had what I believed to be a DMT-like breakthrough. I planned a date with my boyfriend and our best friend. We were going to a big beautiful park with a pond and ride out our trips until it started to get dark out. The day comes, we all have our 3.5G on us, which is the dose I've always taken, and we take them all together. We head to the park 30 minutes later and quickly we all start on the come up. Everything is amazing, the clouds were swirling and the trees were dancing and swaying along. But my friend got sick, she started panicking, and we helped talk her through throwing up. We decided to take her home, give her a trip killer, and just ride out the rest of our trips. Right when we walked into the house, I suddenly started thinking this was too much. I've taken 4 tabs before, and even that seemed way simpler than the visuals I was having. I navigated my way into our bedroom where I helped our friend lay down as my boyfriend grabbed Rexulti to kill her trip. We closed the blinds as she asked and turned on the office to help keep things cheery. As I laid on my bed, my eyes constantly moving around and readjusting to the room spinning and morphing, I became catatonic. I couldn't speak for myself, there was too much for me to be seeing and feeling to make words. Thankfully my boyfriend noticed that I was way too far in the rabbit hole to be fully enjoying myself. I was able to tell him I wanted my Seroquel so my trip would be done and I can sleep off that terrifying experience. He also gave me Klonopin to help calm me down so I wouldn't have a nervous breakdown. But from what I can guess, Seroquel does not kill the trips for me. I don't know if it's because I am prescribed Seroquel and take 300 milligrams every night and my body is just used to it, but it did not soften the blow at all. In fact, it did the exact opposite. As the Seroquel started to work on me, I was suddenly so tired. I couldn't tell if I had my eyes open or not. I felt myself literally losing my grip on my ego. As I was slowly letting go, the voices on the show started to echo. They seemed distant and as if I were in a wet cave. And then I let go. I heard this loud ringing that was moving through me and into me, and suddenly, I was in a completely empty white/gray room. I don't know how, but it felt like I was in some sort of alien-like surgical room. It seemed big and small at the same time, and I stayed in that room for eternity. Time could not measure how long I had stayed in that room. Eventually, even though I did not exist, I was able to look behind myself. I saw silhouettes of these human-like beings. When I saw them, it felt as if it was something I wasn't supposed to be doing. As I turned around, I came face to face with an alien. I felt like I strangely knew this alien in the past, like I was coming back. It spoke to me in a language that isn't even real, but everything it was saying felt like it was being translated in my ear. I can't remember anything the alien told me, but all I remember was one thing, and it was a female's voice whispering, "It's gonna be alright." Afterwards, I was projected off and into a void, where I was faced with a huge ball of light and energy. The only thing I can compare it to would be God. I've never been a religious person, but what I saw had to be God, or at least my depiction of him. It was strange though, because even though I was facing this orb, I felt an extreme sense of oneness and togetherness. We talked for a while. I understood every single thing I ever needed to know, plus so much more. I knew life, I knew everything that was ever going to happen. And then I watched God burst out and create the universe. After that, I was blasted off again and into a completely new universe that only consisted of infinite geometric patterns. I was continuously entering into a huge cathedral with hues of oranges and reds and yellows. At this point, I felt the most at peace. I believe that where I was at was complete nirvana. Afterwards, I was shot out into so many different places. I lived so many different lives, all with very serious Christian-like religious undertones. Then, just as fast as I lost my grip on my ego, I was shot back onto Earth, laying on my bed, humming very loudly. It took me a minute to recollect myself. What I have told you is the best recollection I have of my trip, but it feels like it is only 1% of the whole thing. But ever since then, life seems so simple and mundane. I'm not depressed, but I just feel like ever since my trip I have accepted death, and I am no longer afraid to see what is on the other side. I just want to know if anyone else has had a similar experience to mine. TLDR, I took 3.5 g of mushrooms, started having a bad time, took Seroquel, was sedated, and went into complete ego death, talked to an alien and God, and lived many lives. Anyone ever think they are God while tripping? Psilocybin. It's happened multiple times now to me where I think I'm God. The first time was about 5 years ago. I ate about an eighth of shroom honey. Started tripping balls about an hour later. Threw up colors and fractals. Got stuck in a time loop where I would turn off my bathroom light, lie in bed, turn around, light is on, walk back to bathroom, turn off light, walk to bed, light is on again. Did this like 15 times, very weird. Then I was a baby, I regressed somehow, shat myself, was laughing while playing with my shit, then I was God. As God, I remembered why I created the universe. I remember being bored and lonely. So I created play partners, but it still wasn't fun because we all knew who we were. It was still playing with myself. So basically I realized that we are all God, but we are also all actors pretending not to be God. We are so engrossed in our role, ego, that we can't see that we are the universe. Anyways, so this we are all God thing keeps happening to me when I trip now. Not every time, seems like usually at higher doses. Basically what happens is I stop acting. I've taken several timeouts. Had long conversations with other people who respond as if they are also in the know on this. Sober people who aren't tripping. Mostly the conversation is about whether all this is still fun. And I'm usually depressed, which is then hilarious. I always cheer myself up with hilarious shit because I'm fucking funny as shit. And I dive back into the real world where the fun begins again. So now, has anyone else experienced something like this, or am I crazy? Edit, THX for the responses and positive vibes. I became spiritual last night thanks to mushrooms. Psilocybin. My GF and I stayed in a beautiful, picturesque cabin in the mountains for Halloween weekend. The cabin had glorious high ceilings and massive windows on each side. We started the day off on Saturday morning with meditation and tea. After a light breakfast, we walked around a lake and visited the store to get firewood. At 3:45 p.m., I ingested approximately 2 grams of cubensis mushrooms, dried, ground up into fine powder and soaked in lemon juice and hot water for 15 minutes prior, mixed with plenty of fresh grated ginger, wild berry zinger tea, and a spoonful of honey in my glass after straining the rest out. My GF led us in a brief yoga flow for about 15 minutes, and I started to feel the discomfort of the come-up. Not fully nauseous, more like my equilibrium was off, like being car sick. We browsed through the pages of a coffee table book about cabins, but I felt uncomfortable with it. The stark, modern art of the cabin book seemed impersonal and pretentious to me and made me more uneasy. We walked outside and sat on the deck in front of the cabin, but I mostly sat hunched forward, still uncomfortable. Returning inside, we tried listening to East Forest's album Music for Mushrooms, a 5-hour guided musical journey for psilocybin psychonauts, but it seemed goofy, and I wasn't feeling the spiritual vibes. Putting on some lofi house tunes got me more relaxed, and as the come-up continued, I eventually found myself dancing with my hands and fingers. This continued for quite some time. As I sat on the couch and swayed to the house music, I found myself disappointed with the experience. Nearly 2 hours in, not much had happened. I felt like I was on a very light dose of MDMA, but without the real euphoria. I began to ponder vaporizing some cannabis, but fortunately, I had some type of couch lock keeping me from getting up to reach for the herb. I say fortunately, because no sooner had I set my mind on spicing things up with the weed, did I notice something happening. In just one of the 3 main window panes of the cabin, my visuals were distorted, with the tree in the middle blurring at the edges. Finally, some visual effects. I sat and watched as the tree's shape began to take different forms, with a face mildly appearing to me like a wise cartoon witch. It danced for me, growing in intensity as the house music continued. I was delighted, but found that anywhere else I looked seemed crystal clear and normal. It was only when I focused on this one window pane that I saw my visual field fog up and become transfixed with the dancing tree. My GF switched the music to some lighter, jazzy lofi beats, and the visuals grew in intensity once more. I thanked the tree as it danced for me and gave me a show. Sadly then, darkness enveloped my view out of the window and all was back to normal. Believing the trip to be over, I sat back and looked up at the ceiling, and this is where the real magic began. The ceiling, not the ceiling, the spirits of the house, began to move in front of my eyes. The lines in the rafters became like strings of the instruments playing, and they swayed with the music. My vision became warm and fuzzy on the outsides, like a vignette in a cheaply edited Hallmark movie. The lights played off the ceiling and the spirits danced among it, blurring and then sharpening, moving left to right, all in time with the music. I was delighted. "Play some Bach," I asked my GF. "I want to see what they think of it." As several Bach suites graced the room, the spirits continued to move more delicately. At this point, I asked her to play East Forest Spore's album, abbreviated version of the 5-hour one, understanding its meaning somewhat more. This is when everything came together. The soft, spiritual voices and melodies of East Forest became one with the dance I was watching unfold above me. I was completely transfixed as the figures in the ceiling transformed from simply lines moving and blurring overhead, to brilliant, warm colors of movement and geometric patterns. It was as if I was witnessing a symphony that was written and performed just for me. I knew it to be a gift. I relished every second of it. I told my GF I was tripping my ass off and wanted her to come closer. As she sat next to me, the show completely overwhelmed me in its beauty. What began as the ceiling dancing turned into an entire force of light and color and geometry. 3-dimensional staircases formed and moved together downward like a pathway from heaven. Lines blurred then turned bold once again, each line having every color of the rainbow and glowing. "It's so beautiful," I told her. "Wow. Wow, wow, wow." "What are you seeing?" she asked, but I couldn't answer. Words were inadequate to describe the brilliant display of what they were showing me. It was of a There's so much more, there's so much more, was all I could think to say. More than this. More to life. More than the physical realm. Then it descended upon me. I was in the staircase. I was in the light and the color. It was all around. I began to cry, then I began to bawl my eyes out. It was like the most powerful love I've ever felt. And I was part of it, and it was everywhere. There's so much more. I held my GF and cried and cried. What a gift. I knew now that I had it. I didn't need to watch the show anymore. I was the light and the light was in me. I finally understood the yogi phrase, the light in me sees the light in you. I looked at the fire and my vision returned to normal. I understand then that forgiveness is real. I was awash with forgiveness for my parents, forgiveness for those who had been swept away with the delusions of the church and religion. It was okay. I realized that love is everywhere, you just have to listen for it. Meaning we get so caught up in our daily lives and squabbles that we forget about the love that is all around us. Just listen for the love. The visions had ceased as I was now the bearer of this light, this knowledge. Fear also ceased. I cried and cried some more. I was overjoyed to share with my GF what I had learned. I woke up over and over again that night in excitement, at times in tears of joy. Like a kid on Christmas Eve. What a gift. Thank you, they.